Thank you so much, and congratulations to Beatrice and Diego and the whole World Around team. I thought the morning was absolutely sensational. I really wanted to see every one of those projects, and what is so encouraging for me is how optimistic and action-oriented the work is, that people are really taking on the challenges that we face, and that's really what I want to talk about today. I've been working for some time on the principles of massive change, and over the last couple of years, pretty dramatically, I've heard a lot of talk about rolling back, about going backwards. A few days ago, we rolled back protections for wetlands and streams and rivers in America. I couldn't quite fathom how we could do that. That the kind of core life, the core infrastructure that supports our life, that we can roll back protections. And I think that in a time of change in the world that we're living in, there's kind of two ways that people think about it. The people in this room, I think about embracing the challenges and going forward and designing solutions and really finding our way forward. And then there are those who really think that somehow our best is behind us, that somehow there was a time behind us that was so much better than what it is now. And what I'm here to really talk about today is that idea, and to really show how that absolutely is not true, that in fact, Eden is in front of us. The only chance we have, the only way out of here is in front of us. And the only way out of here is by design, by really using design to solve the problems that we face, to solve the kind of new higher order problems that have been created by design over the last few hundred years. So that's really what I want to talk about. I am the co-founder with BC Williams of the Massive Change Network. I want to talk about an era that we now live in where we are redesigning everything. Practically everything we do will be changed over the next decade. When we look back from 2050, this time will be hardly recognizable in the way that we live. That's the era that we're living through. It is an era of massive change. It's an era of really profound transformation. That is, I think, for me, the most exciting time in human history. The idea that we can, in fact, redesign everything. You can see from this chart, this is the context. I just want to take a moment to think about the context we're living in. This is where we're living today. This morning, I had to change from 7.7 to 7.8. We've turned over another 100 million people. And that's the reality. And you can see what's going on where the less developed countries are just skyrocketing in growth. The more developed countries are leveling out. But the net gain will mean something like around 10 billion by mid-century, which is really significant. The exciting thing about that, when I think about it, is it's going to be 10 billion. That means we're going to add another, more or less 2 billion. But the reality is that we're going to lose about 2.5 to 3 billion during that time. So that means that half of the people are new. We don't have to unlearn things. We don't have to train them out of stupid behaviors that we used to do. We have an opportunity to really set a new agenda for 5 billion new people, which is really exciting. I like to talk about the problems we now face as success problems, not failure problems. We wouldn't have as many problems if we had failed more consistently. We have a lot of problems because we succeeded, because we solved disease and hunger and sanitation. So the red line on this chart, this shows 1750 to today. The red line is population. All the other lines are resource impact. So you can see that we weren't better people 200 years ago. We weren't nicer and kinder. We were just fewer. And now as we approach 8, 9, 10 billion, everything matters, everything counts. The good news is that we won't solve the problems of the future with the tools of the past. This is the work of Rem Koolhaas, and he shows that he did a brilliant thing to really understand how quickly we are adding new capacity. How quickly are we adding the capacity to solve problems? And he shows that by about 2025, which is no time, we'll put the processing capacity of a human brain in your pocket for the price of an iPhone. So you'll have a brain to work with, in addition to the one you already have. Think about, and by 2050, he's estimating we will have the power of all human brains. So imagine having all the thinking brains of the world accessible to you to think about problems for the price of $1,000. It really is a revolution. The challenge is that it's really urgent. IPCC suggests we have only 12 years. I think it's now turned over to 11 to really, confront the disasters that are coming and to really change the way that we do things. Fortunately, people like Greta are galvanizing an awareness, a movement of kind of change in behavior. I work as a design director for a company called Freeman. We produce over half the trade shows and exhibits in America. And we can see in our data that already 30% of millennials are changing their travel patterns. They're changing the way that they move because of this kind of awareness. And so it's really encouraging to think about what could happen. So how did I get here? I was born in northern Canada. I was born on this farm. It was the last farm on the road, last farm on the left. And you can see behind our house was hundreds of miles of boreal forest. I'd never been to a city until I went to college for my college interview. It was the first time I went to a city. It was really a kind of extraordinary, mind-exploding experience. But I grew up in this place. During the wintertime, we didn't have running water. Our house was built on a kind of rocky hill, which meant that during the winter months, we couldn't get water into the house. So my job as a young man was to go to the well in the valley each day and provide water to the house. When I first thought of that, I kind of thought that I had one life back there, and that was a kind of farm life. And now I became a kind of urban cat and I had this whole other life. And I thought they were just completely separate. But what I realized in retrospect is that experience of understanding what it means to provide water for a family is something that I share with about 1 billion people. So there's still about 1 billion people in the world who have to do that. And I know what it means. I know how heavy that is. I know what it means for a family to need water every day. I became a designer really quite by accident. I love putting words and images together. And really one of the first projects I did was on the contemporary city, thinking about the future of the city in a transdisciplinary way. And the editors that I worked with insisted that I was an author in this project, even though I only did design. I fell in love with books. I absolutely love books, and it really became a kind of love of my life. So I've designed about 260 books. And in the process of my work, I became an author. I didn't kind of set out to be. I didn't think of myself as that. But I began doing research, and to do research, I had to write it down. And that meant I kind of slowly became an author. This is the Incomplete Manifesto for Growth, one of the first projects that I authored. And these are 8 of the books that I authored or co-authored over the years. One of those books was a project called Massive Change, and it really was looking at the question of our capacity to shape the world. So, what can we do? How can we change the world and solve the problems that we face? And the back cover kind of says it best. It's not about the world of design. It's about the design of the world. It's about all the things you saw this morning. It's about our ability to really think about the future in new ways. To do that, I started a school called the Institute Without Boundaries. And it was a purpose-driven, entrepreneurial, experience-based education. The idea was take on a really tough challenge in a very public context, and that will accelerate learning like nothing else. And it really did. We did the project called Massive Change, and we looked at what we call design economies. And those are the regions of your life that are being designed and changed and transformed by these new capacities. And what we discovered is that if you think about the number of times you can close your eyes and open them where you only see the natural world, you realize it's almost zero. You live a designed life. You live inside of a designed environment. You live in designed spaces. You interact with designed surfaces. You connect to designed systems. You drive designed products through designed infrastructure. Your life is a designed life. And therefore, the quality of life is the quality of design. Bad design, bad life. And it means that we have to really think much more seriously about design than we ever thought we had to. So we looked at these design economies, and they range from the military economy, how design is transforming the military, wealth, movement, information, etc. This is the image economy. This is like standing inside of the electromagnetic spectrum. So the images that are in color you can see with your naked eye. All the other images are produced with the rest of the wavelengths of the spectrum. We've turned the entire spectrum into an eyeball. So we can look at the universe and make decisions. Look at the universe and understand what's going on and make better decisions as a consequence. What we saw in the end was that what we're really doing is redesigning wealth. We're in the process of reinventing and redesigning new currencies for a new era. So we now think of a wealth of information, a wealth of mobility, a wealth of access. These are all new currencies that are being developed. We still have capital, of course. We still have the kind of classical wealth of money, but there are new, even more powerful forms of wealth that are changing. Through that process, I've been probably the most fortunate designer of the last half century. I've worked with some of the most amazing people on absolutely wonderful projects. I worked with Frank Gehry on Walt Disney Concert Hall. This is a project I did here in New York with Barry Diller, with Frank. We worked with MoMA to move them into their new digs. I worked on projects that I really didn't know how to do. And I was very fortunate that people asked me to do them and kind of said, look, we know you don't know how. We're gonna figure it out together. What I saw during that process was that design was fundamentally changing from what it looks like to what it does. In other words, it was changing from an opaque world to a transparent world. From a world where if you put up an image, that's what people saw. They couldn't get through the image to really look and see if it was real, if it was true. You couldn't interrogate an image and know whether or not that was actually happening. You needed to be the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Today, anyone can look through that image and see what's actually going on. And it's a totally different world. And what it means is that for the communication designer, which is what I was when I started, what that means is that the whole enterprise is actually communicating. So everything that you do is telling a story. And I like to say, let's just turn the sound off. Forget about what we say. Let's turn the sound off, and we're going to look at what we actually do, watch the action, and if we like the action and it's telling the story of who we are, let's do it. If we don't, we have to redesign it. We have to change the story that we're telling. And that meant that we were changing design from visual form to what we call enterprise design. Really thinking of the whole enterprise as a design project. And that meant a really different kind of approach to projects. This is a project I did with Rem Koolhaas to reinvent the future of the library in the home of Microsoft. To think about what does that mean to do that. I did a project to redesign Mecca in Saudi Arabia. And if you said to me down at the well, Bruce, you really should pay attention because you're going to have to design Mecca, I would have said, you're cracked. That's not going to happen. But it is what happened. It's a real crisis. In Mecca, the design is so poor, you can see from this image, that many people get killed every year. Last year was a particularly bad year. I think 800 people died. And it's because of the design. And so they asked us to redesign the city. And you can imagine, I'm not a Muslim, so I can't go there. Our team did it all by video conference and satellite data. I worked with Imagineering to reimagineer Imagineering. And I worked with Frank on a new Museum of Biodiversity in Panama City. What really came out of that era of work, that process, was this new diagram that for me really kind of puts it down what I think our new responsibilities are. The kind of old order of things is on the left, that design is a subset of business, that business happens in a cultural space, that culture exists in a natural environment. And what we saw happening over the last 200 years or so is that nature, culture, and business, even life itself, are now design projects. We're now responsible for life. And it's not, when I first talked about this, people said, Bruce, you're crazy, you're a megalomaniac, you just want to control everything. And I said, no, I'm not. It's not about control. It's about responsibility. It's about what is our responsibility. And if you look at nature, if you look at the natural world around the world, you'll see that where we fail to design, we design for failure. We destroy what we don't design. And the only way that we can actually recover the ecologies that we are destroying is by design, by changing and redesigning how we engage those ecologies and how we support them and how we sustain them. So the question came up that, if you're doing this kind of work, I never imagined designing Mecca and the future of libraries. It wasn't, I was a graphic designer. But it happened slowly and organically. And some time ago, I was made an honorary royal designer for industry in London as part of the RSA. And it's a very cool thing. It's something that Ben Franklin started. It's only 200 designers. And it's a really prestigious thing. And his idea was he wanted to bring beauty and art to industrial products. But now it's much broader than that. As part of that, they sent a group of young leaders to our studio in Chicago and asked us about our work. And we showed them, some of the work I'm showing you. And they said, wow, you're a really weird dude. What kind of designer are you? And I said, I'm a designer. That's what we do. And they said, well, we think of designers being defined by their product, like architects do buildings and product designers do products and graphic designers do visuals, etc. But you're doing social movements and cities, etc. And I said, well, this is how I work. And they said, well, how do you do it? How do you think like that? And I said, well, I just showed you. You should have paid attention. And they said, no, you showed us the results, but not actually anything about how you think. What are the principles? And I realized, I talked to BC, I don't have an answer to that. I realized that I didn't know, honestly. It just happened organically, that we just developed a kind of studio practice that could do these things. And so we decided to sit down and say, there must be principles. In all that work, if you look at 25 years of work, 25 years of studio practice solving some of the most kind of vexing problems ever, are there principles, ways of thinking that we take for granted, that are kind of built into our method? And that's what we did. It took a couple of years to figure out what those were. And we've landed on these 24 principles. And you can see that some of them are really kind of, it's not that we're inventing a Copernican revolution, but a Copernican revolution is taking place. Like if you look at we're not separate from or above nature, that's a fundamentally different place in the universe than our entire history of our relationship with nature. So for most of history, we were told that we own it. We're above it, we're separate from it, and it's ours to use up. Have at it, have as much as you like. Even today, you walk out into the ocean, you go into the ocean, you pick up a tuna, and you say, this is mine. It's mine now. This is my tuna. And it's such a weird, it's such a weird idea that you can just say, yeah, that's mine. Right? Like if you did that on land, it would be a very weird thing. And so that idea that we can just use it up is a kind of crazy idea. And so we said, look, there are principles like that really drive everything we do. And what I want to do is really talk to you about the book that we're doing, and I have the book cover to show you. Talk to you about the book that we're doing of those 24 principles and really show you a couple of those principles. And I want to talk about these two. Begin with fact-based optimism. And I think we saw a lot of that this morning. And the second is always search for the worst. And that's really the idea that designers see the world upside down. Good is bad. Right? We're not needed. Bad is cool. But terrible is really awesome. That's where we can really do a lot of work. So let's begin with fact-based optimism. We start with this concept. So if you go back to that concept of rolling back, how do we get out of that mess? How do we get out of the tendency, the kind of reactionary, kind of defensive mechanism of wanting to go backwards? We have a responsibility as designers to begin with fact-based optimism. Not Pollyanna, not, I'm kind of idiotic and just think everything's going to be okay. No, it's actually looking at the facts and trying to understand what are the opportunities. How will we do it? Are the facts on our side? And what we found in our research is that not only are the facts on our side, but they are so radically on our side, it's kind of insane that we don't believe it. It's insane that we don't believe the dominant story of our time is collaboration and problem solving and taking the world to a better place. That's the true story of our era, and somehow that's not coming across. As designers taking on the great challenges, we have no choice but to be optimistic. Even though our media is structurally oriented around conflict and violence, so media, it's not that they're bad people, it's just that the format requires drama, the drama requires conflict. Conflict, violence is perfect for it. So it just magnetically goes there. People in this room, all the people watching online, being part of this, it's not a story that fits with that model. So it doesn't really work there. So we've got to do extra work to really think about being optimistic. In fact, more people are wealthier, healthier, and living longer, traveling, connecting, and learning from other cultures across boundaries and borders, language and religion, and experiencing the beauties and pleasures of the diversity of our world more than at any time in human history. More people are doing it. It's more diversely distributed. We have more access. We have more possibility. We have more power than at any time in human history. And it's really absolutely critical that we understand what's actually going on. Otherwise, we want to go backwards. There's no better time to be alive. We've created this situation by optimism and design, by successfully applying design methods to problems like hunger and disease, poverty and ignorance. To continue this development is critical to understand our place in history and embrace the optimistic outlook that got us here. That's what I think. Now let me prove it to you. This is a work by Max Roser at the World in Data. And what he did was he said, let's look at the world as if it's 100 people over 200 years. So for the last 200 years, what happened? And in all these major indicators, all these major metrics, we've seen an inversion, a profound inversion of every metric. So in extreme poverty, 200 years ago, only 6 were not living in extreme poverty. 6 out of 100, right? 94 were living in abject poverty. Today, it's inverted. Only 10 are still there. Now, the total number has increased because the total number has quadrupled in that time. But the impact is profound. And the same is true in basic education, in literacy, in child mortality, in vaccination. I mean, these are things that make the difference between life and death. And you can see the impact of this over time. What I say to our designers, We cannot afford the luxury of cynicism. That's for others. Stone throwing, I know it's part of the ecology of change, but that's not design. That's not what we do. We have no choice but to be optimistic. That's the kind of cornerstone of what we do. It's our responsibility. Right? If you want to be a designer, that's what we do. Pessimism is easy. Optimism is hard, because you have to discern possibility where none may immediately appear. Design is really optimism in action. Design is taking that optimism and operationalizing it. The challenges we face today were produced by design and must be solved by design. What we're seeing is that the new challenges are new, higher order, complex challenges produced by the first generation of design. And that's really how we have to redefine it. Despite media negativity, the world is becoming a better place, slowly. It is in transformation. It is moving to this new place. To engage the future, we must face the facts of human progress. Being realistic is often confused with seeing what's worst about our world. Not long ago, there was no Geneva Convention, no United Nations, no World Health Organization. We take these institutions for granted today, but they are nothing short of extraordinary, and they are very, very young. But we have them now, and that's really the new world. Fact-based optimism is not utopian. The charge of utopianism is a powerful way to shut down optimism. If you picture a positive future, smart people will be quick to assure you it's not going to happen. The charge of idealism is hard to refute until you turn to the evidence. That's why, for me, the facts, the reality of our time is so profound. And this quotation from Paul Hawken is, for me, one of the most powerful I've ever seen. If you look at the science of what is happening on Earth and aren't pessimistic, you don't understand the data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore this earth and the lives of the poor, and you aren't optimistic, you haven't got a pulse. Even our greatest problems are offset by new opportunities. So even the problems that are vexing us in the most complex and challenging way are also producing upside. Right? So, I mean, it's kind of politically dangerous to talk about it, but it's important to understand that some things are going to happen that are good because of climate change. Climate change isn't good because it's going to produce dramatic transformation faster than we can respond to it. But there's still opportunities that happen as a consequence. And for me, this is one of the most important. We must be critical, not cynical. In our culture, we've had a tragic conflation of critical and cynical. In other words, we've totally confused those terms. And we've really introduced the idea that to be serious, you have to be negative. And I think it's absolutely, it's one of the great tragedies of our culture, that somehow we confuse those two things. When in fact, to be serious today, you have to be optimistic. And I personally am, I have a kind of allergy to cynicism. If I see it, I want to kill it. And when we did Massive Change, a magazine in London actually did this very cool thing. They arranged for a conversation with David Byrne. And David actually accused me of being, in his words, unreasonably optimistic. And I said, actually, you're more optimistic than me, even though you're cooler. You look cooler and you have a cool persona, but in fact, you do more than me. You've done more than me. Therefore, you're more optimistic than me, because you wouldn't have done those things if you didn't believe in the ability for people to actually change and think in new ways. So for me, the most powerful critique is really showing a better way. So let's begin with fact-based optimism. I have 6 seconds left to show you always search for the worst, and I'm going to do it. The basic idea is this, that we see the world upside down, that good is bad, bad is good, terrible is awesome. We want to engage the toughest problems because that's where the biggest upside is. So as designers, go out there and find the toughest things you can take on and do those things. because that's where you will create the most value, the most impact, and really contribute the most. Where there is waste and inefficiency, design saves energy, material, time, and money. Where there's irritation, frustration, and ugliness, design simplifies, clarifies, and synthesizes beautiful solutions. Where there's poor quality and outmoded, old-fashioned, poor performance, design introduces next-generation solutions to displace and disrupt the old ways. This, for me, is the kind of core of everything that we're doing with the MC24 and the Massive Change principles. The greater the problem, the worse the crisis, the harsher the experience, the more significant the design opportunity. With that, I will say thank you. I just want to add one note. This is the book. I just got the cover. So just for you to know that it is real, published by Phaidon, and I think it's now open for pre-order. Thank you so much.